All right, philosophers, we talked in our last video about what the problem of evil is, at least Hume's version of it. And we talked about a very popular form of defense, the free will defense, and we looked at Richard Swinburne's version of that. There's a lot of different ways to come at this problem, a lot of different issues to consider. And so I just want to give you like a broader menu of options and discussions on this for those of you who are interested. So first of all, here's the version basically of the problem of evil that we got from Hume and that you often hear. And if the problem of evil is construed as the problem of suffering in particular, and on this view, pain and suffering is what is evil, period, full stop. And pleasure or happiness is what is good, full stop. So here's how the argument would run. If God is all good, then he wills for us to be maximally happy. If God is all powerful, then all that he wills occurs. So it follows from that if God is both all good and all powerful, then we are maximally happy. That's the best state of affairs. But look around. We're not maximally happy. So it seems to follow from that therefore God is not both all good and all powerful. Either he's not all good, and thus he doesn't will for us to be happy, or he's not all powerful, he's not able to make us all maximally happy. Okay, so that's one version of the problem. An interesting thing, though, is that this version of the problem of evil assumes a controversial value theory, a theory of the good, which I explained before, that all happiness is good and only happiness is good, and that all suffering is evil and that only suffering is evil. But a lot of people disagree with that value theory. So theists might protest this. They might say that, look, not all happiness is good. It's good when people who deserve to be happy are happy. And it's also good when people who deserve to suffer. When people get what they deserve, that's what's good. But it's not good when people who don't deserve to be happy are happy, or people who don't deserve to suffer are suffering. When God, on this theory, punishes sin and rewards righteousness, that's good. Even though it involves not maximal happiness for everybody, it's good because it's justice. So there's a disagreement here over what counts as good, over the value theory. That would change the shape of the argument. Now, let's say you went with this different value theory that said what's really good is when people get what they deserve. That's not going to eliminate the problem of evil, because even on this view, it's still obvious that a lot of people who don't deserve to suffer seem to suffer, and that a lot of the wicked often prosper. So you've still got a problem here, and that is there's a lot of evil in the world, even if you assume this different kind of value theory. So here's how we could restate the problem so that it's neutral on what exactly counts as good or evil. It just says that there's evil in the world. If God is all good, then he would will there be no evil in the world, or he would only will be good. If he's all powerful, he could pull it off, but it looks like there is still evil in the world. So the theist still has to deal with this issue. Why is there evil? It seems incompatible with God's all powerfulness and his goodness. Okay, well, here's another kind of response that a theist sometimes gives. And so I've pulled a quote from Aquinas, and Aquinas is in turn quoting Augustine. And here's how the response goes. Since God is the highest good, he would not allow any evil to exist in his works unless his omnipotence and goodness were such as to bring good even out of evil. So this is part of the infinite goodness of God, that he should allow evil to exist and out of it produce good. So the first premise of the problem of evil, the general version of it, said that God is all good, that he would will that there be no evil in the world. And Aquinas and Augustine are saying no, an all good God could will that there be evil in the world, so long as he wills to bring good out of the evil that he brings into the world. Okay, so that's one possible response. Now, there's a lot of worries that you might have about this type of response, a lot of objections that could be made. The first is, could there possibly be a good outcome or purpose for the evils which we see in the world? And they list some, say, what possible good could come out of them? And again, the theist might say something like this: look, yeah, people do a bunch of bad stuff and a lot of bad things result from that, but God has the power to uh, judge the evildoers and to vindicate the righteous and to fix all that's going on. God's got the power to do that. So it is possible for goodness to come out of it. Again, the objection might say, even if God has the power to do that, do we have any guarantee that God will do that? That there actually will be a good outcome or purpose for the evils that we see? And the theist might, well, the atheist, like Hume, might say, look, we don't have any reason to think that there's some future state like heaven or a resurrection, like the Christians think, where everything turns out for the best and all of them are righted. We've got to go off of just what we've seen in the world, which is that a lot of stuff never gets fixed, never gets made right. If God's been doing that so far in all of our past experience, and we've got that seems like a pretty good indicator that that's what he's going to keep on doing. Now, the theist might say, well, look, we're not just going off of past experience. The theist might say we have independent reasons for thinking that there is a just God, an all-powerful God who will fix everything. And maybe they might appeal to the Revelation and say, well, we know from the Bible or some other prophetic texts that God's going to fix everything in the end. So those would be some of the lines of debate, and then you could debate whether that's plausible or not. But I think there's even a bigger worry that you might have about the Aquinas type of response, and that is, look, even if God can bring good out of evil, that's not good enough. So here's how the argument might run: a world that had no evil, or at least much less, would have been a lot better than this world in which there's so much evil, even though it may be the case that good gets produced out of it in the end. Second premise is this: an all good God would have chosen the best option. So it looks like it's not the case that an all good God chose to create this world in which there is so much evil, even though good may get produced out of it in the end. It would have been better if there never been any, a lot less. Okay, so that's the revised problem. God could have done a lot better if he was really an all good God. Now, this is the version, roughly speaking, that the great philosopher Leibniz wanted to respond to. So Leibniz is famous for adopting the best possible world theodicy. And his basic idea was this: look, the only reason you think that God could have done better is that you're not really seeing the big picture of all the necessary connections between different situations in the world. If you could see the big picture, you would realize that premise one is false. That is, it's not the case that there's any possible world which is better than this one. This is the best possible one. You might be thinking, how could that possibly be the case, Leibniz? And Leibniz has a really interesting story to tell. All the things that look screwed up about this world are necessary in order to bring about other goods. And you just couldn't have gotten this much goodness unless you had the other pieces. He has an interesting story to tell about that. But basically, you got to break some eggs to make an omelet. That's the basic idea here. Now, I mean, the objection to that might be one that you're having right now. And it's made famous by Voltaire in his famous novella called Candide. And Voltaire just lost his mind about this best possible world theodicy. I think it's crazy to think this is the best possible world. Now, I can conceive of a lot of worlds that are a lot better than this one that seem perfectly possible. Now, Voltaire's novella Candide is, highly entertaining and a literary classic and all that. It's not necessarily fair or rigorous treatment of Leibniz, but Voltaire was never too worried about those things being fair and rigorous. So here's another type of response, though, other than the Leibniz one. Okay. In fact, there's worries that theists might have about the Leibniz type response. People who believe in God, an all-powerful, all-good God, might not like the Leibniz response. Here's why. The argument goes like this. If there's only one world, which is the best possible world, then, and if God is, an all-good being, then God wouldn't be free to create any other world. This one world that does exist would necessarily exist. Why would this world necessarily exist? Well, God necessarily exists. He's a necessary being. And if he necessarily created this one world, which is the best possible, then this world necessarily exists. God couldn't exist without creating this one. That seems to these sorts of theists a violation of God's freedom, his sovereignty, his absoluteness. They want to say, premise two, God was free to create other worlds or to create no world. He didn't have to create this world. Therefore, they want to say it's false that there's only one best possible world. Well, where does that leave them with their response to evil then? Well, here's how they might cash it out. Their objection is to premise one of the previous argument. They want to say God's options, the worlds he could have created, cannot even be compared or quantified or measured in terms of degrees of goodness and evilness, like better or worse options. Here's why. What's really ultimately good for, according to these theists, is that the manifestation of God's attributes. Everything exists for the manifestation of God's glory, his righteousness, his goodness, his power, wisdom, all these things. And a world is good to the extent that it manifests God's attributes. Well, a world that doesn't have any evil in it manifests God's goodness and justice in one way. There's no evil there to punish, then justice gets exemplified simply in blessing the righteous. However, a world where there is evil, but God judges it or forgives it, manifests the attributes of justice and goodness in another way. Either way, there's the manifestation of God's attributes, and those worlds are good. So many different kinds of worlds, they might say, are equally good. Okay, so where does that leave us? Well, that means that premise one of the preceding argument is simply false. That God didn't choose the best possible world. No, this is a good world. It's good in a different way. Now, the objection to this says, it just seems bizarre to say that a world that had no evil in it is not any better than a world where there's lots of evil. Even if good does come from it and God judges or forgives that evil, wouldn't it be better if there was just no evil in the world at all? That's the worry. Okay, so here are the big disagreements that underlay the back and forth that we've been seeing. There's disagreements simply about what sorts of worlds are possible and impossible. Like, how do we know what's possible and impossible? Do I just go off of what I can conceive of? Is everything that I can conceive of also metaphysically possible? Or are there inconceivable things that are also possible? Okay, so there's the disagreement over what worlds are possible. There's also disagreement about what goodness is. What kinds of worlds would be the best world? Is a world good to the extent that it minimizes suffering? Is it good to the extent that it manifests the divine attributes? Or is something else? So those are just big philosophical questions which are at play. Now, the free will defense, like we saw from Swinburne, I think is actually a version of the best possible world defense, and it raises its own unique set of questions. So, according to this view, here's God's possible options, right? He could have created no world at all. He could have created a world where he determined all human choices, and he determined that all of those choices would be only good and where there would be no evil. Or he could create a world where people's choices are not determined at all by himself or by anything else, but yet there is evil. Those are the options that Swinburne sees it. But according to Swinburne in the free will defense, that third option is the best option, to create a world where people's choices are not determined, but where there is evil. Now, he says, that's the best world, because that's the world where you have free and responsible choice and full measure, and free and responsible choice and full measure is a tremendous good. A world that has that in it is good enough to make up for all the evil that goes along with it. Now, here's some theist worries about the free will defense. A lot of people, like Swinburne, uh, do agree with Swinburne that the best possible world is one where God doesn't determine people's choices. But a lot of people who believe in God, and Aquinas to be one, and you might think of John Calvin as another one. He's famous for his beliefs about divine sovereignty. They think that it is impossible for anything to even exist, let alone occur, unless God determines it to exist or to occur. On their view, only the creator is fully independent of causal determination, and all other creatures depend on him for their existence and actions. So on this view, undetermined human choices aren't even possible, let alone preferable. So this simply raises a question about determinism and the relationship of the creator to the creature, if there is one. Now, really, what's at stake here, the major objection to this deterministic kind of theism is an objection from moral responsibility. And the argument goes like this. One, if humans are morally responsible for their choices, then those choices can't be determined by anything outside of themselves. But premise two, humans are morally responsible for their choices. Therefore, human choices are not determined by God or anything else. Now, this raises a question about what are the preconditions for moral responsibility. And that is a topic that we will return to later when we talk about free will. On the divine freedom view, as I'm calling it, a theist like Calvin would affirm that moral responsibility is compatible with divine determinism. That is, humans are morally responsible for their choices, even if it's the case, even though it is the case that God determined those choices. The divine freedom theists would also affirm that a world in which evil is justly punished or justly forgiven is as good as a world without any evil, even if it makes sense, if it even makes sense to quantify or compare the goodness of the world, which it may not. So on this view, it is compatible with God's goodness to create a world with this much evil in it, provided that God justly punishes or justly forgives it. All right. So there's 100 more questions for you to think about and consider. Hope those help with you.